Today we have a crazy revenge story all revolving around a big lie. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, next time, maybe stay out of my section of the freezer. You see, when I applied for my master's studies, I envisioned seamlessly fitting into the provisions made by the school for housing. However, reality had other plans. Within the first week of resuming classes, I found myself scrambling to secure a place to live. The cost of living in the city far exceeded my expectations, presenting a financial challenge that caught me off guard. It wasn't the first time I would be away from the familiar comforts of home and thrust into the whirlwind of university life. I hoped this experience would mirror the ease of my undergraduate studies. Still, it quickly became apparent that it wouldn't be the case, especially when it came to my living situation. My options were way too limited, and this was because I had to work with a tight budget. I had to resort to living with housemates to make ends meet. The arrangement was straightforward. We would split the housing utilities while each having our own separate rooms. As an international student, this setup was vastly different from what I was accustomed to back home, but I had to adapt. The room I ended up in wasn't exactly luxurious. It was cramped and far from perfect. In a weird way, it could be compared to having to share the bathroom with 6 siblings. Only that this time you became siblings by the unequalness of life. Living with 6 roommates was like diving into a sea of personalities. I mean, there was Maya, the bubbly and outgoing one, who had a kind of laughter that got you infected with the laughing sickness. Then there was Alex, the quiet bookworm who spent most of his time buried in his studies. The only time we got to see him was when he needed something that he could not get in his room. There was Michael, Josh, and Eddie. Maya was the only female among us. She was the main housemate who tried to include people in her affairs. It could be casually asking or telling you the details about her day, or wanting the whole house to hang out on a random evening. All was good till it was not. As the days began to build up, I quickly picked up on something that seemed relatively strange. Snacks and groceries from my stash began to disappear with alarming frequency. Well, I don't think the right word should be disappearing. The right word was that I noticed I ran out of groceries faster than I should have. And at first, it didn't mean anything. I just counted it as one of those times that my appetite increased and I ate more than I thought I'd been eating. It's happened before back home, during my first degree. Then, I thought my roommate in college was stealing from me, but it turned out that I became a little gluttony at that period. But as the days passed and the snacks continued to vanish, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that something wasn't right. What did I do? I started to keep a mental tally of my inventory, only to find it dwindling at a rate that far exceeded what I would consume on my own. It was as if my groceries suddenly started developing legs after I bought them and took to their heels when I wasn't looking. This might sound dramatic, but for a struggling master's degree student who lived barely on the 20-hour weekly work wages, it was necessary. Despite my growing suspicion, I was hesitant about confronting my housemates. I was weary of the fact that I might be jumping to conclusions or causing unnecessary tension within our already crowded living space. More so, I was the newest occupant. It didn't seem like I could be making allegations. After all, I lacked concrete evidence to support my suspicions, and accusing someone without proof felt unjust and unfair. Yet, as the supplies continued to vanish, my frustration mounted, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone among us was to blame. What I did not know was that sooner than I expected, the issue I was refusing to attack head-on would become a greater dilemma for the whole house. How it happened was when I made a casual joke to one of my course mates one day after class. We had been divided into groups for a project, and one day while we met up to discuss the project, another group member tried to take a piece of someone's fruit, and I casually said, "It was better knowing who was taking your stuff than being in the dark." I explained what I meant on their insistence, and they advised that I set up hidden cameras. What started like a joke became a reality when they presented a tiny camera to me in the next class. It was weird, but the idea was welcome. I could finally see who was taking my stuff and confirm that I wasn't crazy. So I set up the camera just close to the fridge such that I would be able to see anyone that came close. I kept at it for days, letting the camera do its thing. Then one day, all of the stress paid off. I was going through the bulk of the recording that the camera had taken, and just before I dropped it in annoyance for being unproductive, I saw the culprit. Or should I say the culprits, plural. Instantly, there was this surge of anger that came upon me. A part of me felt like they shouldn't have been taking my things because they were to a large extent more buoyant financially than I was. Plus, they could have just asked if I was willing to share. They did not. They chose instead to steal from me. The funny thing is that the two culprits were not aware that they were two. In their sheer arrogance of thinking I would never find out about their theft, they believed they were the only thieves. But now I had evidence at least, and I was bent on getting my due, or at least an apology from the two criminals, Maya and Ryan. So I went ahead to question them in a way they would not suspect that I was onto them. Unlike what I expected, Maya was the one who quickly took offense, asking me if I was insinuating that she was a thief. I would have predicted Ryan to flare up first, yet I kept my cool. I even went as far as apologizing for the uproar that my questions caused. All of this was done with them being oblivious to the fact that I had video evidence to support my claim. I could have shown them the video footage from my phone at that point in time, but I did not. I predicted that it would make me feel uncomfortable in the apartment. Moreover, it felt like letting them off the hook too easily. If they could poke their nose into my freezer and deny it straight to my face, then they deserved everything that was coming to them. The sweet thoughts of revenge danced in my mind. I pondered various harmless pranks, considering each one's potential impact. Of the ideas that came to mind, I thought of swapping out their shampoo with something else, or maybe adding a bit of dye to it. But if I went through with it, I would have to explain why I decided to do it. I couldn't deny my active involvement with the swap. It had to be something that I could be less directly involved in. So, I decided to attack based on the exact way they had messed with me. It was the only acceptable retribution I could see. The concept seemed perfect, a lesson that would be felt without causing lasting harm. I imagined their surprise and discomfort upon realizing what had happened, a satisfying twist in our ongoing battle of wills. With my plan formed in my head, I set out to execute it. Carefully, I selected a few items from my pantry and added the laxative, ensuring it was mixed in discreetly. I was sure to pick the ones that usually ended up finishing way faster than the rest. It was risky. I knew the risk. I knew everything that could go wrong with the plan, but I kept at it. I couldn't resist the thrill of anticipation. As Maya and Ryan unknowingly consumed the groceries laced with the laxative, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of nerves and satisfaction. With each passing moment, I observed their discomfort growing, a subtle yet undeniable testament to the success of my revenge plan. Then the effects began to trope in. As soon as the effects of the laxative begin to take root, the expressions on their faces begin to move from confusion to discomfort. I watched from afar, feigning ignorance as they grappled with the sudden onset of symptoms. Despite the urge to revel in their discomfort openly, I maintained a facade of innocence, careful not to give away my involvement in their predicament. It started with Maya just as I knew it would. She was the one who made my groceries the center of her feeding. Milk, eggs, rice, coffee, all of it. I saw Maya's eyes widen in surprise as she felt the first twinges of discomfort, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach. She was by the kitchen that evening. Ryan, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his brows furrowed in confusion. The way she ran out of the kitchen area was a sight to behold. The tables had turned, and I found myself relishing the taste of sweet vengeance. And just after she left, Ryan did the same thing. As Maya and Ryan exchanged puzzled glances, I fought to suppress a smirk, masking my satisfaction beneath a veneer of concern. With each passing minute, their discomfort grew more pronounced. Despite the temptation to gloat openly, I resisted the urge, maintaining the facade of innocence that I'd carefully crafted. The discomfort they felt did not get any better after their trips to the bathroom, and they retreated to their respective rooms. My revenge was moving powerfully well. But I was yet to be satisfied with getting back at them for what they had done to me and my groceries. I believe their discomfort continued to the end of the day, and by the night, Maya had a good time to think things through. When I heard the knock on my door, I wasn't expecting to see her by my door, but there she was, looking all uncomfortable and confused. She said she felt sick and weird, and I pretended like I didn't know what was going on. But deep down, we both knew it was because of the groceries I had messed with. When she asked if we could have a chat, I knew we were going for a ride. A cat and mouse game of some sort. We sat down and had a serious discussion about how we needed to respect each other's stuff and space, and how it was of great importance for us to set some clear rules for living together. I noticed her dancing around the fact that I'd questioned her concerning my missing groceries and the fact that she suspected that I had something to do with why she was in so much discomfort. But she didn't raise it up front. A part of me believes that she knew she couldn't. 1. She would have to confess to taking my groceries without first informing me, her theft, and 2. She would have to be in possession of evidence that showed that I deliberately did something unethical to the groceries to get her discomfort. After a while of dancing around, she finally ended the charade and left my room. Ryan never confronted me, but at least my groceries became mine after the talk I had with Maya. Is it really better to go behind everybody's backs and try to handle this in the dark with laxatives? Is it going to be too volatile if you just bring it up to your roommate's face? Hey, I know you're taking my food. Stop. What's going to happen? Are they going to go, no, you're a liar and I'm blowing up the lease? Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, my girlfriend almost pinned a pregnancy on me. I made her suffer for it. My girlfriend of 2 years tried everything within her able capabilities to make sure that I took responsibility for a child that wasn't mine. And this, in fact, would have ruined my life completely. But thankfully, I found out on time the paternal parent of the child she was carrying, and for the wrongful act of trying to pin the baby on me, I made sure she got exactly what she deserved. For the longest time, I'd always been single, and this had never been an apparent problem for me, as I always had my peace of mind. I mean, I quite literally was living my best life at the time, and there was nothing anyone would have told me back then that would have changed my mind. I'm talking some 4 or 5 years back, when I was still a teenager, that is. This is the story of how my girlfriend, female 23, and I, male 24, who have been in a supposed steady and healthy relationship for the past 4 years, found ourselves struggling to decide whether or not I was the father of the child she was carrying in her womb at the time. Before we get into that, I'd like to walk you through our life up until that very moment. My girlfriend, let's call her Selena, and I met each other way back when we were in high school. We weren't your typical high school lovers at the time, as we were both in different schools at the time and also in different districts. The reason for our meeting was because of the inter-district competition that was usually held among schools surrounding my school's district at the time. And the reason for my school being the meeting point of every school in every other district was because they were the pioneers of this event, and thus considered a neutral territory for every single participating school in other districts. Anyways, this was the case, and on that very event, seeing as it was scheduled annually, I was the designated representative of my school at the competition. Seeing as I was the student's representative at the time, this only seemed logical. On the other hand, Selena's school, which had been my school's rival for as long as I can remember, selected Selena to be their representative. Not for any particular reason, but just for the main fact that she was just that brilliant and well-deserving of the opportunity. We had quite a lot of time to prepare for the upcoming competition, and I was determined to not bring shame to my school. Moving on, the day of the competition was drawing near as quickly as I could keep up, and before I knew it, the day was finally here. I wasn't in the least nervous about the competition, as I knew no matter what happened, I was going to triumph, regardless of whether or not the odds were in my favor. The one thing I didn't expect was the fact that my competition, Selena, was also subscribed to this ideology and mentality, as upon the commencement of the competition, she didn't hold back her punches. She was coming in hot, not relenting even in the slightest, and after quite a number of rounds, and with the passage of time, we were soon through to the finals. And just as everyone had been expecting and anticipating, we had both made it to the finals, and she was my opponent. This was the moment when things really got down. After a record-breaking number of rounds and neither one of us letting up, the officials decided to call it a stalemate. Even though this was a competition and there needed to be a winner, they decided that we were both deserving enough of the first position together, and this was their final decision. Ultimately, they acknowledged the both of us as winners of the competition, and albeit the fact that this was satisfactory enough for me, the same couldn't be said for Selena, as I could see the look of disappointment in her eyes. She clearly wanted to win, and she tried her possible best to do so. However, she was evenly matched, and so was I. Anyways, right after the competition, she made sure that she kept in contact with me, as she said she wanted to make sure that we had a rematch to mutually settle our rivalry, and I was totally open to that. We talked for quite a while before she departed for her school in her district. From that day onwards, we talked for as long as possible, trying to challenge each other, ultimately to test our limits. And just like that, in our own weird way, we were each other's best friends. Even though we were districts apart, we still knew what it meant to always be there for each other, and at the time, although neither one of us knew it, as we were still under the pretense that we were both rivals. The moment I knew that I had feelings for Selena, and the moment I knew that feelings were mutual, was when my school was hosting their annual winter party for her students, and every student was to attend. The only issue is that I was, or rather, I've never been a fan of parties such as those. And it was really hard for me to convince myself that I needed to attend. However, my mind soon changed completely, as when I informed Selena about the party, she was really excited and asked who I was going with. When I told her that I was still considering whether or not I was going to even be attending, as I wasn't the party type, and this was where things got really interesting. So the next thing she says to me is that I should give her the time and location for the party, as she wanted to come on my behalf, and she wanted me to be her +1. I still didn't catch on at this time, as I was still trying as much as possible to avoid anything that would make me go, and then that was when she told me that she really missed me, and that she wanted to see me. She also said I had to attend too, as she wouldn't be happy with me if I didn't. With this, I had no other choice but to attend. I informed her of the date, and that was the end of that. It was finalized. I would be attending the party. Anyways, fast forward again to the day of the party. She came all the way to my school, driven by her father, who left her in the care of my parents, as the drive back might be an audacious one, and we prepared ourselves to head to the party. While at the party, when everyone else were busy on the dance floor, there I was seated without the faintest idea what exactly it was that I was supposed to be doing. And then she, Selena, dragged me on over to the dance floor, as she said we needed to have fun, as that was the main reason we came. I was still skeptical at this point, and I just followed her. That was until we got to the dance floor, and she ultimately told me that she had feelings for me, and right then and there, as I had this feeling, which was almost as if I'd just gotten total clarity for everything that I'd been feeling, and I just knew right then and there that I had feelings for her too, as this was very much needed. Although the fact that she had to be the one to profess her feelings for me first, it didn't bother me even in the slightest. As what was more important was the fact that we both understood our feelings for each other, and we were true to ourselves. Right after the party, we took a long walk home, and we talked about quite a number of things. Things like whether or not actually getting into a relationship with each other is a good idea, what it meant for our friendship, and how we both felt about the distance that was between the both of us. And I must say, I was thinking that this was going to be quite a lengthy conversation, but then it wasn't, as we had quite literally everything sorted out between the both of us, and things were looking quite positive too. Basically, from that night onwards, we got together as a couple, and we've been together ever since then. Even though our relationship has had some ups and downs, some situations where we were in the rough, and misunderstandings were causing quite a number of problems, we never for once doubted the way we both felt about each other, and this made me have even more faith when we had gotten both to our final year in college. This was the time where I realized that she was the one I wanted to truly spend the rest of my life with. However, this was where everything took a sudden turn, and for the worst at that. So while we were both in our separate colleges, since the time of the beginning of our relationship, we had never been intimate physically with each other, and this was my preference. Although I wanted it, I couldn't bring myself to ask. But as at this time, I just knew that it was what I wanted, after she'd brought it up a couple of times and I'd turned her down. And then I invited her over to my place, which took her a whole day, as our colleges were quite the distance from each other, and then we sought to get down to the order of her visit. Being a virgin, I knew practically nothing as to what I was supposed to do, and I thought she was one too, but apparently she clearly had more experience than I did, and while we were in the act, I just wasn't feeling too good, and I decided to stop halfway. She was furious and upset with me, reasons unclear to me at the time. Even after I tried to explain to her how I was feeling at the time, she didn't pay me any attention and she just left. We weren't on speaking terms after that day for close to a month, and then she finally reached out, a whole month after, after I was almost on the verge of losing my mind, and she said she could probably be pregnant. I lost my ability to speak. I didn't know what to even say or how to play the situation. I just tried asking her if she was sure, and she sent me the test results. She also notified me to inform my folks, as she had already told hers, and apparently they had left her in my care. What could I have possibly done? I was still a nobody at the time. I could barely take care of myself, let alone another person, and a newborn. I didn't even question her claim of me being the father, and I just went along with it. She stayed at my place for the entire duration of the pregnancy, and when she was a few weeks in, we went in to see the doctor as she was beginning to have some complications. After the checkup, the doctor asked me to stay behind as he needed to discuss something with me, which I did. He then went further to inquire from me some certain health-related history as he needed to know for the sake of the baby, and I told him, as he even insisted to get a DNA sample as there might be a need when the baby is born. He needed to get one that would match. I went along with everything, and when the doctor discharged us, we went back home, and I got a message a few hours later which stated that the sample didn't match that of the child. I was confused, and I went straight to the doctor's the next day, and what he told me truly shocked me. He told me that I wasn't the father, as our genetic markings weren't a match for father and son. I was devoid of words. I couldn't say anything for quite a while. I didn't want to confront her about this at the time because she was very stressed from the pregnancy, and so the only way I could make her suffer some more was total abandonment. When she needed me the most, I totally bailed. And till this day, I haven't set my eyes on her even though it's been 2 months since then. So she has to know that one way or another, OP must have found out, right? It doesn't really sound like they tried all that hard to get OP to come clawing back to her. Surely she knows what she did, and when OP ran for the hills, it had to have been obvious, right? Either that or, well, she was probably kind of preoccupied, you know? That said, our next story is, what was the biggest lie you were ever told? What was the biggest lie you were ever told? This was what I asked my now partner as we were reminiscing a bit about our past. The biggest lie I was ever told was no small lie that had the littlest of effects on my life, but rather it was one that almost nearly destroyed the basic foundation of everything that I'd been building and working on. To put it into perspective, this was a lie that almost rid me of everything that I was worth at the time. It all began quite a number of years back. At this time, I, male 28, was still in my previous relationship with my partner, female 26, who had been with me at the time for a little over 3 years. We got together about a whole year after I had just experienced a terrible loss that changed my life forever. When I was still in college, about a whole year before I met my ex-partner, I lost the one person that truly believed in me when others didn't. The one person I genuinely looked up to as my role model in this life. The one person that I could say with pride that was my #1 support system. Even though I had a whole complete family, I lost my dear father. And I know what you might be thinking, but yes, I was that much closer to my father than I was to my mother and even any of my other siblings. And the reason for this was majorly due to the fact that my father was never lacking in the financial area of his life. He had everything he had ever wanted, as money was never his problem. This could be attributed to the fact that the business that was left behind for him by his late father was one that yielded extremely high yield by the time he took his time and turned the business around. Right after doing this, one could say that my father single-handedly lifted himself to a whole other level. And my father, being the very traditional man I've always known him to be, although already having 3 other children apart from me, he still made it known to them that the entirety of his assets were going to be left in my possession, as he was never going to break away from tradition. This actually caused quite the problem with every member of my family, as I automatically became the object of their envy and hatred. My very own mother had already begun threatening me, all for the sake of having a share of his fortune. Even though my father already told me that, the reason he isn't leaving anything for my mother was majorly due to the fact that he knows fully well that she has never been faithful in their marriage, and that I was the only child of his that he recognized. He even went as far as telling me that he'd actually caught her red-handed violating their marital vows, and that this was his way of paying her back for being unfaithful and disloyal in their marriage. I'd always looked up to my father in every area and general aspect of life. And when he told me this, I was truly heartbroken, as I never could have believed that such a thing would have happened. and my father chose to keep quiet about it all these years. I could never imagine what he must have been going through, all alone at that too. Anyways, when my father passed, I was called back home, as I needed to be there for the entire funeral proceedings and all. And right after that, at least 3 days later, my father's best friend and family lawyer came on over for the will. And after he did so, every other member of my family were left speechless and in a state of utter disbelief. They couldn't have imagined that my father could go through with what he'd been telling them all these years. My mother tried her best to force me to relinquish her supposed share of his wealth and properties, but I wasn't even moved in the slightest by whatever lies she was concocting, as I already had full and proper information as to why things played out the way they did. She even went as far as being adamant and stopping me from leaving the room after the will had been announced, as she started playing the mother card, claiming that she held me and nursed me for the entirety of 9 months. She also played the health card, claiming that she was always there to nurse me back to good health whenever I wasn't at my best. She went to great lengths, in fact, to tell me how much my father loved her and how he'd made a terrible mistake in his will and that it was my decision to give to her what she rightfully deserved. All that she had to say to me that day fell on deaf ears, as I wasn't even willing in the slightest to listen to anything she had to say. Anyways, I left my family home after I'd gotten all of my father's assets in my name and was granted access to every single one of his accounts, both local and international. And I attempted to cut off all ties with them, but I just couldn't at the time. Anyways, I was back in school, and life was already hard enough as it was. And even though I had the means to get everything I ever wanted without having to work for the remainder of my life, I still chose to follow the path my father had set me on, as I wanted to honor him even in death. And within the span of an entire year, I was done with college completely. Now, this is where things start to get really interesting. So right after I graduated from college, there was no particular need for me to continue the traditional job search that every college graduate embarks on, as I was already financially stable on my own. And so I decided to let loose a little, as it had been ages since I'd even caught the slightest bit of fun. I had little to no friends at the time, and it seemed like having fun all by myself would have been an even sadder thing to do. And so I went out in search of some people I could hang out with. And the only place, for some weird reason, that came to mind was a club I'd been meaning to visit, which was apparently impossible for those without the means to gain access to. After spending a night there, I got approached by a special lady. Now, I call her special, not because she looked appealing or because of how she dressed and expressed herself, but because of the way she made me feel. Although it might seem quite far-fetched and probably delusional, I can tell you for a fact that she was definitely interested in me, and not in the normal way. It was almost like she knew me from somewhere, because the way she gave me the stares. I had to approach her and introduce myself, and from her mannerisms, I could definitely tell that she knew something about me. This only made me all the more serious and interested in her. I took her home that very day, and although we didn't do anything sexual, as I'm not that kind of man, we did in fact have quite an enjoyable evening. One filled with actual intellectual conversations, laughter, drinks, and a lot more. While I was planning initially on only having fun for a limited period of time, she actually made me let loose for the first time in a long time. Also, I want to clear something up. She wasn't a hooker, nor was she a stripper. She was just your average party girl that, from what I'd gathered from our conversations, decided to take a breather as she'd really been choked up with work and all. After that fateful meeting at the club, we had several other encounters and meetings with each other. Some were formal and others were just casual outings. I realized at some point that she truly understood me. She knew me even though we'd only been seeing each other for a little over 3 months at the time. And I knew what I just had to do because I didn't want to delay anything with her. And so I asked her to be my woman, as I confessed my feelings to her. She was really honest and open about her feelings for me too at the time, and she accepted my request. And then we went on to engage each other in a relationship for the next 3 years and 5 months. Now, I have an accurate date for our relationship because the events that unfolded right after this just so happened to have fallen under the date of my father's passing. Right before I paid my respects to my late father, I was already planning on moving to a whole different country and starting my new life there with my ex-partner. But the thing was, I wasn't too sure at the time whether or not she truly was the one I wanted to be with for the rest of my life. And to ensure this, I had to put a few things in place and figure out some things. And the number one thing that kept bothering me was the fact that she had this look like she knew me way back when I'd first met her, almost as if she was expecting our meeting that day. Even though quite some time had passed, I was still bothered by this, and I sought to get to the root of everything, as every time I tried to bring it up, she always found a way around it, which only made me all the more suspicious. The only thing left for me to do at this time was a thorough background check on her. And I knew it was unethical and totally wrong of me, but I had no choice. She didn't leave me with any apparent choice, and to do this, I hired a private investigator, who was supposedly the best in the country, and he only gave me a week, which was more than enough for me to get what I needed. And when I got the feedback about the investigation, I was in shock. I found out that not only was my ex-partner in regular contact with my mother and my family, but she was also receiving payments from them, probably for a service she was rendering, and I soon found out, after going through her phone later on, that she was sent by my own mother to get my personal details, which would grant them access to everything I own and would enable them to take everything my father left behind for me. I couldn't believe my eyes. I started to doubt whether or not she even truly loved me. And after reading the entire conversation, I found out that to her, this was all business. She spent the entirety of 3 years wasting my time and deceiving me, all for the sake of serving my mother. I was totally and completely broken as I pondered on what to do next. And then I saw another piece of shocking information, which was the fact that not only was she deceiving me, but she was also involved in my father's sudden passing. This made me furious. How could she have done that? And she had the temerity to even come before me and lie and ultimately deceive me. I couldn't take it. They needed to pay. Every single one of them. And the only way to have done that was to involve the law enforcement without anyone's knowledge. They all just got apprehended without actually knowing what they did until they got to the station. And that was ultimately the last time I ever saw any one of my family, or even my ex-partner, as I left the country immediately. This story almost reads like a classic novel, like a huge surprise twist at the end, like a light reimagining of Lemony Snicket's or something. One great big, "it was you all along" kind of story. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.